I wake up, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you. When I go out, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who goes along with you. If I get drunk, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who gets drunk next to you. And if I haver, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who's havering to you. But I would walk 500 miles and I would walk 500 more just to be a man who walks 1,000 miles to fall down at you too.
Hello and welcome to the Holyrood Sources podcast, where we take you inside Scottish politics. I'm Calum Macdonald. Hello. And this is Geoff Aberdein, who is Chief of Staff to the First Minister Alex Salmond. Hello, Geoff.
Good morning.
And Andy Maciver, who is Director of Communications for the Scottish Conservatives. Hello, Andy.
That was new. Hello.
Yeah, well, it's a big day, isn't it? Geoff, what are you wearing? Just describe it for our listeners who are not watching on YouTube.
I am wearing my Scotland vintage replica top in recognition of the fine victory last night. By God, they don't have to put us through the ringer, eh? I mean, 10 minutes to go and we're not qualifying, and then one of the most craziest endings of a game I've ever seen. Wonderful stuff. Absolutely amazing. And by the way, for those who haven't watched the game, I can't imagine there's many of you, Scott McTominay's goal in particular, I thought was truly world class. That was one of the best moments as a Scotland fan that I have ever witnessed.
Really?
I'm
Andy?
just wearing a shirt because I'm off to Parliament, so
Well,
I'm not able.
Thanks for the emotion there,
I'm
Maciver.
not able to display my Scottishness in quite the same way as Jeffrey is able to this morning. I have to say.
Well, that's classic Conservative.
Exactly.
Classic bourgeoisie.
Do you know though?
Morningside podcaster in his pink salmon shirt.
I'll show my
really
age here.
good, Andy.
But the last time I remember something quite similar to that and how late it was, Calum, you will definitely not remember this. Geoff, you might. When Richard Gough scored, I think it was in Cyprus in about the 92nd or 93rd minute to win. I think it was 3-2. I think it was, if I remember rightly, to qualify for the World Cup. But no, it's going to be great. It's going to be great, isn't it? The last time,
do you know?
I was 18 at France '98, and my
I was 5.
oldest daughter will be 16 next year. So, oh my God, it's been a genuine, proper generation. So it's good.
Yeah,
Mad.
I was 15. By the way, so now we know the age profiles of all Holyrood
profiles.
You can do the math.
You were probably in the pub as well, though, Geoff. To be fair, wasn't much going on with ID up there at that time.
No comment. But I always remember, my brother went to Paris, and he came back, and he's like, "You've got to come to the next World Cup, Geoff." And I was like, "I'm there, brother. I'm there." I didn't think it was going to take 28 bloody years. So I'm afraid, and I informed my fiance last night that we're not going to Spain for our summer holiday next year. Put it that way.
Yeah,
well, I have. As I was saying to you guys on our WhatsApp group last night, I'm already going to America next year for the family summer holiday anyway, and I'm in Boston during a last 32 game and in New York during a last 16 game already booked. So obviously when Scotland qualify from the group and get to the last 32 and then the last 16, I'm sorted.
I'm
staying
for the final. I'm staying for the final. I'm that confident.
That confident. It's not often I say this, but I do pay my licence fee, and with appreciation for colleagues at BBC Radio Scotland, I think we should just relive a moment.
We are back onto the halfway line. Is he getting this tight? Goodness knows, but Denmark have it. Scotland just need to hold out for a few more seconds. My voice just needs to hold out for a few more seconds. As Gilman has it, he's surrounded. He pokes the ball back. Surely now Scotland will hold on to possession. It's McLean. He's looking to go for goal from the halfway line. It's chipped straight. Glorious! Glorious! Kenny McLean from the halfway line! Scotland 4, Denmark 2! We are returning to the World Cup! What a night!
want to cry. I
had goosebumps listening to it. You know exactly what's going to happen. It's like, oh man, that is amazing. Absolutely amazing. Michael Stewart in the background there. That is a heart attack.
It was just going absolutely wild. I mean, we are a politics podcast. So John Swinney's tweeted, thank you for such a momentous occasion, said the First Minister who was there. Anas Sarwar posting, congratulations Scotland, we're going to the World Cup. And surely, as usual, the Scottish Sun wins on front pages this morning.
We've got to take our hat off to the Sun today. Well done.
Always. World Cup wonders. Scotland 4, Denmark 2. Party time for Stevie's heroes. The main headline, though, and there is, of course, a picture inset of President Trump holding the World Cup in one of his red MAGA hats. But the headline is, Donald, where's your boozers?
Brilliant.
Which is one for the
kudos.
I mean, it's not beneath us to say that we would love to take the podcast on tour to the World Cup next summer. So if you would like to partner with Scotland's biggest politics podcast on a North America tour that happens to coincide with Scotland being in North America for the World Cup, then please do get in touch. Hello at holyroodsources.com.
I do like how you've said, if you'd like to partner with. What you're really saying is pay for us to go. And we will put your name on our podcast, which we will do from America. But partner's cool. If we like partner, fine, partner.
To provide vital coverage of a moment in Scotland's history. I mean...
Deeply unequal partners, fine.
Why would you not want to be a part of that? Do you know?
Honestly, Calum, if you pull this off, no more criticism of you. That you will be a legend in my eyes.
Well, I'm just, I'm sure there's somebody there.
Surely we can get media passes, no?
We can definitely get media passes. It's more the expenses that I'm worried about. It's the cost of the thing. We'll definitely get media passes.
We'll have to delete all those podcasts from the past, Geoff, where you and I make clear that we're not journalists. But that's fine. That's okay.
I do legitimately think, I honestly do think there's a good case for the podcast to be there. I think that would be a vital... Stop laughing. I think there'd be a vital case for us to be that there'll be politicians there. We can speak. Think of all the Scottish people listening to this podcast from America, and there are quite a few, who would finally be able to come along and be part of our podcast. And if we're nothing if not inclusive on Holyrood Sources.
It's a public service, essentially.
Public service. Hello at holyroodsources.com. We look forward to partnering with you. And well done to the Scottish team. Right, let's go on to some of the political stories of the week, shall we? In a few minutes, actually, we'll be hearing from Pam Duncan-Glancy, the Scottish Labour MSP. A couple of weeks ago on the pod, we had Liam MacArthur, the Liberal Democrat MSP, joining us. Of course, as the assisted dying legislation is at committee stage now at this point. So Pam Duncan-Glancy, who opposes the legislation, will speak to us later on about why, and indeed talk to us about how the bill is progressing. We've also got a whole bunch of polling data to consider with you on the pod as well this morning. But first, ExxonMobil is to close its Mossmorran plastics plant in Scotland, putting more than 400 jobs at risk. This is the Fife ethylene plant, one of Europe's largest and most modern ethylene plants. ExxonMobil said the UK's current economic and policy environment, quote, combined with market conditions, high supply costs and plant efficiency do not create a competitive future for the site. They say it's going to shut in February 2026. Geoff, it's been there for 40 years. The UK government says it's explored every reasonable avenue. They said the closure's a commercial decision for the company to take. To what extent do you think that is valid?
Well, by definition, the company's taken a commercial decision, but the company's also made clear that it's government policy that has had a major role in them coming to this decision. Now, there was an emergency statement in the House of Commons last night, and then I saw a lot of Labour MPs kind of whip to clearly say, this is all ExxonMobil's kind of fault. It's not really policy. They're making all this money and yet they're going, but I'm afraid, guys, okay, that's a sticking plaster to get you through a debate. Please, I hope that's not what they truly think and feel, because the evidence just doesn't point to that. Now, let's point to the evidence first and foremost. Now, I'm not going to get too technical here, but something that people need to understand about policy and its impact on this particular subject at Mossmorran. So, I would urge people to read the Financial Times, but listen to this. As the Financial Times article indicates, importers of ethylene will be exempted from planned carbon border adjustment mechanism, and yet domestic producers are loaded with emission carbon taxes. This is actually the same policy for oil and gas. When you think about it, where imports are exempted from this CBAM, and as a result of this direct policy, we deliberately favour the importing of these key building blocks of modern industrial economy over domestic production. In fact, what we're saying here is we are punishing our own domestic industry over imports, right? Which at times, when it comes to oil and gas, are carbon heavy and more costly. It is ridiculous. But also just the facts. So in June of this year, following the sad demise of Grangemouth, costing 400 jobs, there were 3 supply chain companies, Altrad, Kafer, Billinger, that had to announce at Mossmorran 98, 55 and 10 jobs respectively, and that was all linked to the slowdown at Mossmorran. This was coming. Where were our politicians then? And by the way, not just Labour, where were the SNP? And frankly, this has been a systemic problem and a lack of understanding amongst our body politic about how our industry works. So the Tories are just as culpable here, I'm afraid, as well. A plague in all your houses. But since then, we have had thousands of job losses in supply chain companies across, Fife, Livingston, Aberdeen, Teesside. This cannot be allowed to continue. We are getting things wrong. The transition is not being taken place in a managed and just fashion that we were promised, one that would protect jobs. So we must look at what we can do to incentivise investment in our industry. I said it last week, I will say it again. We are now 1 week to go to the budget. Get rid of this energy profits levy, reintroduce licensing, and get some projects passed. And that will, in time, buy ourselves time as part of the transition, reduce our reliance on imports, and make sure that we've got a skills base and company base that can take advantage of the opportunities in renewables. Second thing about policy related to renewables, if I may, right, is that we've got transmission charging, which essentially, and I won't get too technical, we can discuss it on a future podcast, which disincentivises Scottish projects massively. Ofgem, the energy regulator, just 2 weeks ago, essentially rejected a security factor, rejected the ability to look at a more conducive policy environment for Scottish projects to go ahead. It's not likely to be reformed until 2029. We're asking for developers of Scottish projects to take a punt in the dark, not knowing what charges are going to apply to them on offshore wind. So not only are we getting our oil and gas, our refinery, all our traditional industrial framework all wrong, we're getting the policy framework for offshore wind wrong as well, because we're not being able to transition jobs at a time when they are made available. And fundamentally, that's what we were promised, that's what we're being let down on, and it's unacceptable. And this is actually the wanton de-industrialisation of our country, Calum. That's how serious this is, and we need our politicians to wake up.
Let's have a look at some fresh polling data from YouGov, with just a few months to go, of course, until the Scottish parliamentary election. This is from YouGov. The SNP are the party that Scottish people are most likely to consider voting for. 37% saying they'd consider voting SNP, 27% say the Greens, 26% for the Lib Dems, 23% for Labour, 21% for Reform UK, 15% for the Conservative Party. Your party's on 15%. And Alba is on 8%. Andy, is the wording of this slightly odd? Would consider voting for? Why is it framed like that? That strikes me as slightly unusual.
It would be odd wording if what we were trying to get from it, or what they were trying to get from it, was a voting intention, but that's not really what this question is. I actually think it's really interesting wording, because what I think it basically does is it tells you what the ceiling is for each party. So if you add up all these percentages, it's obviously way more than 100, because people are selecting more than one, because it's based on how likely you are to potentially vote for a party. But I think the parties should be really interested in looking at this polling. And if listeners are just go on Twitter to the YouGov feed. I think it's from Monday, if I'm right in saying, Cal.
Yeah, that's right.
But some of the ceilings are pretty worrying for some parties. The SNP ceiling will worry them. Because basically they've got 37% of people who say they would consider voting for the SNP. That's not 37% saying they will vote for the SNP. It's 37 saying they would consider voting for the SNP. That's pretty low. That's pretty low. Some of the other stuff is interesting. So the Greens and the Lib Dems come in second and third. Not meaning that they're going to get these high numbers, 27, 26%. It doesn't mean they're going to get them. But what it means is they've got people who are there and who are potentially listening to them. The Tories on 15%. I mean, they polled 25% last time, and now only 15% will even think about voting for them, not necessarily vote for them. So I think some of these numbers, they are different. It's different questions, but some of them are very interesting. Can I pick out a couple of other snippets which I think are really interesting in it as well, right? If you look at 2014 no voters, so people who voted no in the referendum in 2014, only about a quarter of them are considering voting for the Tory party. That is their absolute base of people, no voters. There's almost as many people in the no voting constituency in 2014 who'd consider voting SNP as who would consider voting Tory. I think that is pretty interesting as well. I'll tell you the one thing that we've talked about on this podcast a lot, at a Scottish election in particular. What wins at a Scottish election? If people think that you are going to stand up for Scotland at Westminster. And the standing up for Scotland question is absolutely massive, right? It's absolutely huge. The SNP win that question by, you almost can't see the others on the graph in terms of who wins that question. Just two other important points. Nigel Farage is more popular in Scotland than Keir Starmer. That is pretty fascinating piece of polling in the space of 18 months. But the one thing I think will give a little bit of pause for thought is that the Scottish Government's approval rating is actually pretty low. They're by far the most popular party. John Swinney is by far the most popular First Minister, or at least the least unpopular First Minister. But their approval rating is only 25%. I mean, I think it's pretty clear, guys, that the conditions exist in Scotland for a populist insurgency of the sort we've seen in England and in Wales. I think the conditions exist for it. I just don't think the person exists for it. And I think this poll tells us quite a lot about that, to be honest.
I mean, if I may come on in a couple of points, on that last point first, I think Andy makes a really kind of interesting observation, because fundamentally Nigel Farage isn't standing at this election in Holyrood. And who is the reform persona that's going to be leading the charge? Without that, that's a problem for them. That would be the one counter to the rise of the populist challenge, because they don't have a figurehead. Secondly, on the original question on who would you consider voting for, I don't like it. Actually, I don't like it. It's not to say it's not interesting, the findings, but to kind of oppose what Andy says to a slight degree. If you're in a constituency, remember a constituency contest where the Greens have no chance of winning, for example, yes, many people might consider voting for them, but the voters know, they're intelligent by and large, they understand what's going on in their own locality. They then say, well, I'm not going to waste my vote on the Greens in the constituency level, I'll transfer it elsewhere, it might go to the SNP. So I think that counters what Andy's saying, and I much prefer seeing headline voting intentions. I want to know how people are going to vote or intend to vote, and then you directly compare across a long trend. It's not to say that it isn't interesting for the reasons that Andy outlines. I just don't like that as a yardstick, frankly.
But there'll be a bit, don't you think though, Geoff, that strategists of all the parties will look at this and they'll say, okay, there's if there's that percentage of people. So if you're an SNP strategist and you're saying, right, there's 63% of the population who will not even consider voting for us, that's a bit of a concern. It's a much higher number than we've seen in the past.
It absolutely, for those reasons, I think it is interesting. But as well as I do, when you get into the heat of the battle in an election contest, we see all the leaflets. Only the SNP can win here. Only Labour can defeat the SNP. That's the framing of the contest as you get closer to polling day. It always is. And you'll see people that are swithering voters lend their vote to their, to the option that they think they would more prefer. Let's put it that way. If they don't actually support them, then they more prefer. It happens time and time again in politics. And that's why I'm not particularly a fan of that question. Because I don't give us a true indication of what's going to happen in constituencies around the country. But for the reasons you outline, yes, of course that would be concerning. Because I bet if you asked that question 10 years ago, the SNP ceiling would have been much, much higher, of course. And for that reason, the scunner factor is abroad with the, let's call them the established parties, and it does lend itself to a reform insurgency in some level, yes.
Do you know, I've been looking quite a lot of polling lately. I've done quite a lot of presentations to clients and looking quite a lot of UK polling, and I just think that I sometimes just think, I don't know why the parties, particularly the establishment parties, are not looking more at the data that's coming through. The YouGov tracker polling at the moment is really fascinating from a UK perspective. People have completely changed over the last 5 years, but the solutions offered by the mainstream parties haven't changed at all. That's why Polanski and Farage are doing so well, because they're tapping into something that they know exists just because they're watching. Whereas Labour and the Tories are just not watching. I mean, if you look at polls that, for example, say, do you want more tax and more spending or less tax and less spending? 5 years ago, every poll, as it always has, would always say we want more tax and more spending. They don't say that anymore. Polls don't say that anymore. They say they want less tax and less spending now. But nobody offers them it apart from the insurgent parties. People are not being offered what they actually now want. I think that's a huge part of the problem for Labour and the Tories. They are basing their assumptions and they are basing their decisions on old thinking, not on new thinking.
The other part of that, though, is that arguably the insurgent parties are not offering it credibly. So people are looking for something, but they're not actually getting a plan that would make sense, are they? Is that fair to say?
But then the counter to that then, Calum, is does that matter?
Well, fair,
if this is retail politics and we look what's happened in America with Donald Trump, when you scratch the surface, where are the policies of substance that support what he's saying? Yeah. So, that would be the counter there. Look, fundamentally, guys, let's take this to the present day. We've got a Labour Party about to conduct a budget, the most important budget, I think, of recent times in terms of the future stability of that government. Now, unless they've got a massive rabbit in the hat that no economists or political commentators have been able to identify, this is going to be extremely challenging. The environment we find ourselves in next Thursday will dictate, in my opinion, how long Starmer has left. Now, I still think it unlikely, as I've said before, that he'll go before Christmas, but I think May's looking increasingly likely. Who do people turn to in May? Will they go with Farage or will they go with the SNP in Scotland, Plaid Cymru in Wales? This is going to be the most fascinating period in our body politic that I can actually remember, probably actually since the immediate aftermath to the Brexit referendum, actually. Yeah. I genuinely, I think that is how important and pivotal this period in our politics is.
And the only thing we do pretty much know about May is not where they will turn, but we know where they won't turn, which is Labour. And that, ultimately, and to go back to this YouGov poll that we introduced on, if you look at the people who voted Labour in 2024, just 18 months ago, their own government in Westminster is almost as unpopular with Labour voters as the SNP government at Holyrood is. So, the collapse of this is historically completely unforeseen. The collapse of this government. I know we've talked about it, and we've wondered over the times that we've discussed it whether it can be brought back at all, whether it's a blip. There's a few years to go. At some point, you get to the point where you say it's over. They can't recover from it. It's gone. It's gone too far down. They just can't do it. And we may be at that point.
Well, but just one. That said, I've been immensely impressed. We touched on it last week. We were too early in the process to really gauge the reaction to the briefing against Wes Streeting. But actually, as we kind of suggested might happen last week, he's come out smelling the roses. He went on and did all the media rounds, looked very competent, and then all these people he was picking a fight with the BMA, essentially on his media rounds, as well as, defending himself from the briefing from Number 10. Came across extremely capable. I think that the Home Secretary has established herself, whether you agree with her positioning or not on immigration, has established herself as a pretty potent figure. So I think, again, the counter to what you're saying, Andy, is why I'm suggesting this is the most pivotal period in our recent politics is let's accept there will be a new leader sometime in the future. If that leader comes with gravitas, credibility, in the marketplace, that could turn around Labour's fortunes. And that's I just don't think it's going to be able to happen before May, given we've got the winter recess. We'd have to have a leadership contest, which would be very bruising. Can you resuscitate in time for May? But beyond that, anything's possible.
But Streeting and Mahmood have quite a few things in common. One, they've shown themselves to be very articulate and in command of their brief. Secondly, they've both put themselves on the side of public opinion on the issues that they're talking about.
Yes.
However, they have also both put themselves entirely against the side of MP opinion in their own party. Yeah. And that, in essence, is Labour's problem here. They have a group of backbenchers who are frankly behaving in a pretty infantile way, actually. And they will really not let them do anything that is seen as mildly controversial. But the interesting thing is the Labour MP group is now totally at odds with public opinion on almost everything that they're asked to tackle. And that's the problem.
Well, and it speaks to some of these numbers potentially. So, latest government approval ratings in Scotland. UK government, you mentioned the Scottish government already. UK government disapprove 75%. And you also mentioned the complete collapse of Scottish support from those who voted for Labour in last year's general election. So 48% would consider voting for Labour this time around. Do we need to let Geoff take a victory lap on standing up for Scotland, perhaps? Just give you a minute. Go on.
Well, no. Look, I thought it was quite funny, Andy trying to adopt my territory earlier on. I'm
not sure we've ever disagreed on standing up for Scotland being the message, is it? Have we? Is that not why I wanted the Tories and the Labour to be abolished?
Andy, your pink salmon shirt revisionism is at play. Look, look. If this contest, in the minds of the electorate, is viewed as right, the SNP have not been great in all honesty, but by goodness, I trust them to at least stand up for me or stand up for Scotland. Labour are done and dusted. If they're going into the election thinking we need a change, my concern for the Labour Party, who are very well exposing some of the SNP's deficiencies in government, doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to say, well, I'm looking for a change, but it's not going to be this lot because of how their counterparts at London are carrying on. And that's where they may go to reform. And that's what we're seeing, frankly, in a lot of the polling, that reform's eating that chunk. So that's the one weakness of Anna Sarwar's positioning. But if it's standing up for Scotland, there's only going to be one winner. And I think this polling bears that out.
Just to note as well that on their Scottish Independence tracker, yes, 49%, no, 51%. So, I mean, it's basically even Stevens, isn't it? Still, as
which is astonishing in itself.
I mean, A couple of weeks ago on the podcast, we heard from the Liberal Democrat MSP Liam MacArthur, whose assisted dying legislation is making its way through the committee stage. That's stage 2 at the Scottish Parliament. And this week we're joined by Labour MSP Pam Duncan-Glancy. Pam, welcome to the podcast.
Hello there. Thanks for having me.
It's great to see you. I think, first of all, we should just check in on where things are at, because we were reflecting with Liam a couple of weeks ago that there are hundreds of amendments here for the committee to work through. What stage are proceedings at? How are you getting on?
So slowly, I suppose, is one way to describe it. But ultimately, this bill is quite literally a matter of life and death. And so it's right and proper that there are a number of amendments, both at stage 2 and I suspect again at stage 3. Members are engaged in the process, as you'd expect, but they're really exercised about I suppose getting this right and including amendments on it. And then, of course, we'll have stage 3 again to see what happens after that. I'd say so far, I'm slightly disappointed that a number of what I would have considered reasonable amendments to the legislation have been rejected by the committee at stage 2. That is quite worrying, actually. And I'm disappointed that those amendments, some of them have come from the hospice sector, others have come from disabled people in their organisations, others have come from a kind of human rights perspective, and a number of those have been rejected. Key safeguards that I think would have been in place. Now, I don't think it's going to make the front page news for me to tell you that I don't support the legislation and amendments or otherwise. But nonetheless, if a bill were to go through at stage 3, I think it's important that it's a robust bill. And so I'm quite disappointed that some of the amendments have been rejected at stage 2.
Yeah, I suppose that is part of the process in all of this, but it does bring me back to actually something that Liam said a couple of weeks ago, that he didn't consider any of the amendments to be wrecking amendments, i.e. to just sort of take the bill out of action altogether. Would that be your analysis of the amendments too, Pam?
Yeah, I think my colleagues have been, myself and my colleagues have been quite careful in how we've approached this bill. I think we recognise that for many people it's deeply personal, regardless whether you support or don't support the bill. And this is literally about the sort of conversation you're having on a very deeply personal level with your family members, and also in your own mind and head at times as well. And so on that basis, I think people have been careful and looked at a series of amendments. Now, some of those I've submitted in my name. Whilst I don't support the legislation and won't support it at stage 3, I haven't brought any amendments that I think would wreck the bill, because I think as parliamentarians we've got a responsibility to do the job well. That's what stage 2 is about. That's what stage 3 is about. And so I hope that we can continue to take that approach. I'd like to see some more of the amendments go through, though.
Can I just ask, Pam, actually for the benefit of our listeners more than anything, so what's the nature of the amendments that you're seeking to get through on this legislation, so we understand like the positioning you're taking, which is very constructive, given that we understand why you're knocking it back at stage 3, but what's the flavour of the amendments that you're trying to get through on this legislation?
So I think one of the most important grouping of amendments I think that have been considered are what I would characterise as the proximity to death. So as it stands, the legislation says that you're eligible to be assisted to die if you have a progressive condition that is at an advanced stage and that is likely to end in your premature death. But there's no definition of premature, and there's no definition of proximity to death. And so any medical profession, I think, in the country and beyond would consider that my condition is progressive. So I have juvenile idiopathic arthritis. I got it I was diagnosed with it when I was 18 months old. It was a very aggressive form of arthritis, did a lot of damage and still does, and is considered progressive. It's considered advanced. I think when I tell people that I have arthritis and they see the condition that my body's in and the limitations that it has, it's hard for anyone not to consider that it is, of course, advanced. And because of some of the complications, because of the shape and size of my bone structure, because of complications that happen with arthritis, it could indeed end in my premature death. And so I think having something that talks specifically about the fact that the illness is terminal, but also the proximity to death is actually quite important, I think, in order to safeguard the difference between people who could lose function. Mine would arguably be 18 months old. But you could be diagnosed with a terminal condition, lose function, and feel that at that point life is very, very difficult to go on, because losing function of any description is really difficult. Like I said earlier, I can't do much for myself at all, but I would be worried about losing the limited function I've got. Now I have confidence in social care systems and all of the rest of it, that when they're in place, they can support people to live long, prosperous, and fruitful and enjoyable lives. But fear of losing something can encourage people to consider life is not worth going on, and it is intolerable. Without having that proximity to death test, I really worry about what we're suggesting, and who could be eligible. So that is probably the most important aspect of this bill that I think is really concerning, and that doesn't currently have an amendment in place to consider that. The other kind of areas of amendments that I think are quite important are things around the provision of training for medical professionals, the referrals to organisations that can support people during really difficult periods in their life, including in terminal illness, like, for example, disabled people's organisations. Now, and I raised these amendments because for a lot of disabled people, if you acquire an injury, for example, or you become ill, so you spent, say, the majority of your life as a non-disabled person, with all the kind of functions and faculties that we would all expect for shorthand, and then you become unwell, or you become ill and you lose a lot of that, it can be quite a traumatic experience, and it is really difficult to see the wood from the trees. It's difficult to see that there's a future. But I know a lot of people who live with very limited function, and have long, and good lives. But if you said to someone tomorrow, if you had that, how would you feel? And people say, oh, well, I don't think I could go on. And not having referrals to organisations who are really adept at supporting people to understand that life can go on in circumstances where you lose function, even if that loss of function could end in your premature death, I think is really important. They were knocked back. Amendments around opt-in for doctors who are providing the assistance to die, some of those amendments were knocked back. And for example, there was an amendment that said, that was quite a robust amendment around protecting professional integrity, so that if somebody said they didn't want to participate in this, they didn't have to. But then Liam MacArthur's amendment went through that said, well, no, you don't have to do it yourself, but you do have to refer to someone who does. That could be really difficult for people who have a particular concern about this legislation. So that's just a flavour of some of them.
I wonder, Pam, if I could put this to you. The fact that there are around 300 amendments, does that suggest that the bill is in really quite insufficient, dare I say scary, shape, given the subject matter?
Definitely. And again, I don't want to keep going, to labour the point too much, but the issue about proximity and definition, I think, is one of the areas that is really quite scary. And in fact, when we look at other such pieces of legislation, so for example, Kim Leadbetter's bill in the Westminster Parliament, that, to be clear, I wouldn't support that version of the bill either, but that does include elements of safeguards that have already been rejected at stage 2 in the Scottish bill. And that really, really worries me, because if we're going to legislate to make it possible for people to be assisted to take their own lives, then we have to make sure it's robust legislation. We also need to make sure that it is entering the world in a context where people whose function, body or mind, is reducing or reduced due to disability, impairment, or indeed terminal illness, or all of the above. We have to make sure that we're entering legislation like this into a world where all of the things are there to support those people. That's just not the case right now. Social care is on its knees. 10,000 people are stuck in houses they can't get in and out of because they're not accessible. 1 in 4 disabled people don't access the palliative care that they need. So bringing a piece of legislation into an environment where it is very difficult to live as a disabled person, to me, is quite scary, because it could make it easier to choose to die instead. And that's fundamentally a big problem.
I think this is all really interesting. It's fascinating hearing Pam talk about it. Listeners who heard the episode with Liam MacArthur will probably know what I'm about to say, which is that I didn't really make much comment on it during the episode with Liam. My company has client interest in this debate, so from a propriety point of view, I'm not going to say too much about it. But I'm going to say the same thing I said when Liam was on, which is that the Parliament takes a lot of flack from the public, quite rightly so in many cases, because of the nature of debate, the style of debate, and the intelligence of debate that takes place in the Parliament, which isn't always very good. I mean, I've been in and around the Parliament for not far off all that's 25 years now, on and off. This is as good as I have seen this Parliament operate, I have to be honest. And just hearing Pam there articulate her position so effectively, passionately as well, but so effectively and so intelligently, that has been the nature of this debate so far. I think it's been a really, really good debate on all sides, which is critical for an issue of this importance, obviously. But I just wanted to make sure that people understand that this is something which the Scottish Parliament is capable of. And it's shown that it's capable of it here, and it's a very good and important debate for it to show what it can actually do. I think I probably speak for a lot of people when I say that I wish it could do it on more than just this debate as well, actually, to be honest with you. But I think it's been excellent, and I think Pam's position has been outlined extremely well there, as Liam's was a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, I find this stuff really fascinating, because I'm not a subject expert by any stretch on this. I suppose, Pam, a question I have is, if the legislation was passed, and in respect of what you just said, in terms of some of the amendments you've sought to get into the bill are rejected, what do you think that does in terms of your view and others that are against this, in terms of how they would react to that? And what stages are there for recourse beyond that? Are there any? I mean, I'm just trying to understand what happens next, assuming one result, for example?
So I think there will be a lot of people across Scotland who will be worried if it passes. They'll be frightened about the sort of value that places on a life that has lost function of some description or another. And during the debate, which I would agree entirely with Andy, has been a really good example of how the Parliament can work at its best, and how we can genuinely respect one another, and take care to listen to each other, but also understand where each other are coming from. Because as I said earlier on, this is absolutely deeply personal. That I think, if it were to go through, people would be really worried about the impact that it could have on people's opinions on what it is like to lose function. And we've heard some people say, for example, if it'd be very difficult if you no longer had the ability to swallow, and surely this is the point at which somebody would say, well, that's quite, that's enough for me. I have friends who are peg fed because they can't swallow. Both myself and my husband have had swallow tests because of the different natures of our impairments. And so there is, again, it's about the judgment that becomes placed on somebody whose bodily and potentially mind's function is not the same as other people's. And for years we've seen quite a negative attitude towards what it is like to be a disabled person. And I understand that. As a disabled person, I understand that. Like, somebody gets me showered in the morning, somebody helps me go to the toilet, somebody helps me eat. Other people would be worried about that, and I get it. I've had 44 years to get used to this. I do understand that people worry about it. But that can then be quite pervasive and can cause things like negative attitudes when disabled people try to go for jobs, for example, because people with the best intentions of the world, the best intentions in the world, people come to a circumstance with their own views about people's abilities. And we could be entering a space, if the legislation went through, where not only would we be already in a world that undervalues bodies that can't do things like mine and other functions, we would then be entering a world that actually now gives you an opportunity to say, I don't want to live like this anymore. I don't want that level of function. That level of function, I'd be better off dead, to coin one of the campaign phrases. And that's why I think it would be worrying. In terms of recourse, I think there will be opportunities. So yesterday, anyone who was following the committee in its third session, I think it was, will know that Jeremy Balfour, MSP, wrote to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Disabled Peoples Committee to ask what their view would be. Now, anyone to get the committee to look at the view, a particular piece of legislation, the request has to come from a parliament or a committee. It can't come from an individual MSP. The committee yesterday, the Health and Sport Committee, agreed yesterday to write to that committee for their view. I think that's incredibly important because that is an established committee that has real understanding of what the conventions on the right of disabled people are and how they should operate. I think that committee's view will be crucial. Now, there is, my understanding is that there is no requirement for that committee to give, for the Parliament to withhold or hold back any proceedings to wait for that committee's view. I think if it's possible, it should do, because I think that committee will have a lot of expertise to bring to bear in the situation. But nonetheless, that is one area where people could obviously ask for a judgment, either as the passage of the bill goes through or at stage 3, should it pass. And it's not yet clear whether the bill will pass at stage 3, but if it did pass, there would be an opportunity to have that view given. And then I suppose ultimately there's the usual courses of action that can be taken when people consider that a piece of legislation is contrary to things such as human rights.
You know something, I was on the Liam MacArthur episode, I outlined a situation that, I thought I would be instinctively in favour of it, just linked to my father, and now I'm listening to you speak and outline your concerns, and I'm a bit lost. I don't know what to think. I'm very conflicted on this, and it is such an important debate. But we get the benefit of listening to people like you and Liam MacArthur putting forward the views. Not everyone in the country does, and I just I have to say I'm completely lost. I don't know. I don't know what to think. But I do know that it's been handled very well. So
yeah. Which is important. I do, just as a concluding question, Pam, I just want to ask you, kind of actually to build on what we've been discussing, why it is you think this legislation is here now? And it's here now in the Scottish Parliament and at Westminster, as we've been discussing. Is there a societal shift in favour of assisted dying? Is that why this legislation is here now?
I think there are a number of reasons why it could be here and why it could be now. There are countries, other jurisdictions, who incidentally, whether they have assisted dying legislation on the statute or whether they've taken a decision not to have assisted dying on the statute, have grappled with very similar issues to that which we're discussing. So Scotland is not unique in terms of the issues, slightly unique in terms of the content of the bill in some areas, but not in terms of the content of the discussion. And I think that there's just it raises the consciousness across the world, and in the age of quite rapid news, people become aware of it, and just, I suppose, just to pick up on Geoff's point a moment ago about instinctively it's like, oh, I think this is the right thing to do, and then you hear more about it. I think that's actually an important point as well, because if you say to someone, should somebody die in pain and suffering? Yeah. No, of course not, absolutely not. Should we give people the choice to end their own lives? When on the surface level, and actually most consultation responses to this question show this, that on a surface level, most people kind of instinctively go, choice. But actually, once you talk about what is the choice, what options do people have? And when you look at the availability of things like palliative care, when you look at the environment in which we're bringing this discussion, choice is not really something that is available to a lot of people. And in fact, the state have a lot of control over disabled people's lives, and by definition, people who have terminal illnesses' lives as well. And so there is limited choice anyway. And once you start to have that conversation, you see support change actually for the legislation as people start to engage with the greater detail of it. My view would be that in that circumstance, where there is doubt in a piece of legislation like this, I'd rather the statute stayed as it was, and that we have a relentless focus on how we can improve people's lives and improve people's deaths, because nobody wants people to die in pain or suffering either. And we've got a lot of work to do in that, including in the hospice, by supporting our hospice sector and supporting palliative care too.
Pam, it's so good to speak to you, and we will keep in touch as the legislation progresses from here. But for now, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.